Okay. So the idea behind this group, for anyone who it might be your first time joining, or maybe you were here last month, but the idea behind this group is that we wanted to just create a space where people can just set aside some time, take an hour out of their week or their month, learn a little bit about themselves, about ways to improve their business, learn from other people. And we'll be having these monthly sessions to discuss topics around things like leadership, team effectiveness, company culture, things like that. And this session is a bit like a part 2 following on from last month. So some of you may have attended that. If you didn't, don't worry. We'll be sharing the recording and everything like that, so you can catch up on that if you want. But last month, I had the pleasure of interviewing Nicci Daly. She's an Irish Olympic hockey player, and she's a hockey World Cup silver medalist, as well as a motorsport data engineer. So she was sharing her experiences and how, the Irish hockey team changed their culture to become a more high-performing team. So these insights really translate to how we all interact and work. We might not be part of a Olympic sports team, but many of us are probably part of some kind of team, maybe in your workplace. So today we'll just be taking those learnings from Nicci's experiences, backing it up with a bit of research, and then providing you with frameworks and strategies to start putting those in place. So as I said, these are monthly events. We're having this one. This is our second session. Next month, we have Bridget Farrell, who I can see is on the call there. She's going to be hosting next month. So Veronica is just going to pop the link into that, into the chat. So you can, register for that and make sure you're kept up to date on all the events. Just a quick introduction as well. My name is Julie O'Sullivan. I'm the head of people development with Jigsaw Better Business. I'm a business psychologist, which basically means that I aim to improve the way that people experience work. And, I work with companies to develop their leadership effectiveness, team effectiveness, enhancing their culture, things like that. So just very general housekeeping at the start. Perhaps at the start, we can maybe you can keep yourselves on mute just to avoid any background noise. But if you do feel like contributing and joining in the discussion, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me. That's totally fine. So you can feel free to unmute yourself at any stage, or you can pop comments or questions into the chat. I do want it to be a very relaxed environment where you feel comfortable asking questions or sharing your ideas. We will have a breakout room later on in the session. If you aren't able to join that, don't worry. I understand some people might need to just be joining this and staying on mute, so that's totally fine. You'll be invited to the breakout room, but you don't have to move to it. So you can just stay in the main session if you're not able to unmute yourself. So we are recording the session at the moment, but the breakout sessions won't be recorded. So you can feel free having a conversation there, sharing whatever you feel comfortable with just the people in your room. Okay. So as I say, pop your camera on if you feel comfortable. At any stage, you can feel free to unmute yourself, and you can use the chat as well to interact, comment, ask any questions you may have. For today, I mentioned I'll just do a quick recap, refresh our memories on what we talked about last month, bring in a bit of culture or a bit of research on culture, and I'll be providing you with frameworks as well that you'll be able to download and use with your own team or in your own organization. And we'll have that breakout discussion then to discuss those frameworks and say, is there any potential challenges or benefits of using those frameworks in your own workplace? And then obviously there'll be time for questions and things like that at the end. If you didn't see last month's session, as I think Veronica has popped in the link to the YouTube video. So if you didn't see it and you want to, feel free to watch that. I found it really, really interesting, and lots of people were saying the same, that they really enjoyed it. So Nicci was talking about her experience of being on the Irish hockey team and how that experience changed over time as they changed their culture. So when she first started out in the Irish hockey team, the players that had been on the team for longer had more sway and more say. You know, it was more of a hierarchical structure. So the more junior players were expected to just be quiet, do as you're told. The more senior players, they made all the decisions. So Nicci was a junior player at the time, and that was her experience. And you know, I think for any of us, if we think back to maybe one of your first jobs where you didn't have as much experience as other people, maybe that experience resonates with you, where you were expected to just, you know, sit back and be told what to do and to follow, as opposed to, you know, come up with ideas or make decisions. But Nicci was saying then that over time there was a shift, and they were intentionally trying to create a different culture. They called it the Green Army culture. So each team member, you know, one difference there was that each team member was treated equally, regardless of their seniority. Each person was expected to have a voice. Each person was expected to meet the standards that they set and hold others accountable to those standards as well. And she was talking about culture as relating to a group's values and beliefs and standards. And so she was saying that they took time out to really intentionally define what's acceptable and what's not. But as well as that, it's not just a once-off, okay, we did that, we defined our culture and then move on. But it's also about identifying ways to live by those values and really live by that culture and hold those standards. So that's just a very quick recap. I wrote a blog on what I was taking from that interview. So if you prefer to have a little read of that, I think it's in the chat as well that Veronica's put in. So whichever you prefer, there's videos, there's blogs, you can catch up on all that. So today we're talking about culture, and what was great to see last month as well was that people were really making use of the chat function. So I asked people, you know, what does culture mean to you? How would you define it? And there was lots of different input. And I just took 3 comments that came up in the chat. So Damien was saying that culture is very linked with language and behaviors. Vitaly was saying that culture is that set of common rules and behaviors that are accepted by a group of people. And Matthias was saying to him that team culture means that people share the same values, work towards the same vision, and aim to support and build on team members' strengths and weaknesses. So those were some of the comments that came in, just 3 out of many. So if we kind of, you know, we can kind of put it together in that way and say, like, these are some of the words and themes that come up when we talk about culture. You know, it's what kind of language and behaviors could we observe? What kind of attitudes and beliefs do people hold? What are the norms and rules and standards that we set and adhere to? What's the vision or the purpose that we're all working towards? And what are the values that we hold? So this is just some of the common things that come up. And there's, you know, so much research and so many possible definitions of culture. One that we'll go with today is that it's a collection of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that make up the regular atmosphere in a work environment. So if I were to visit your workplace, I suppose that's if you have a physical workplace. I know some people do, some people don't now. But say if I was to visit your workplace, what would I see people doing? How would I see people interacting? You know, what kind of language would they be using? And when we're thinking about culture, that's often an interesting, you know, thing to think about, is what would an outsider observe? Because culture is often something that we don't really notice around us. You know, it's like fish don't see water. We become so accustomed to our surroundings that something that's very normal to us might be strange to an outsider. So culture, it can be a bit ambiguous. It can sometimes seem a little bit intangible, which can sometimes then make it more difficult to measure and manage and track, because it's a little bit intangible sometimes. but it is unique to each institution and it can be changed. So it is malleable. Say, for example, if we think of, I don't know, like the safety culture, say around like seatbelts in cars, in a couple of decades ago, the attitude was that maybe, yeah, it's totally normal to maybe not wear a seatbelt. The beliefs wouldn't have been maybe ingrained in people that that's important. And then over time, we were shown ads and our cars will beep when we don't put them on. And, there's all these different things that gradually shifted attitudes, shifted beliefs. And now the behavior is, usually you just put on a seatbelt. So those things changed over time. That's just one example of, how, we can be influenced by external kind of stories and that. So it can absolutely be changed, but generally that's with intention and with effort. So it's this socially constructed, construct that's arising from group interactions. So last month I asked, how people would define culture, but I'd be interested to hear in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves. What would you, if you were observing a high performing culture, what would you expect to see? So feel free to put your thoughts into the chat, or you can unmute yourselves. And I suppose specifically, we're thinking, what does a sustainable high performance culture look like? If you're saying, oh, we're really high performing, but everyone, stays late and everyone does the work of 3 people, is that sustainable, or is it possible that people will burn out and then eventually leave? So what kind of things do you think of when you think of a high performing work culture? So Brendan, yeah, focus on results. Absolutely. Mairead, yeah, I really like that you put balance in there, because exactly it's not just, drive, but yeah, to make it sustainable, there's a bit of balance, there's joy, productivity. I really like those words for it. Yeah, Jonathan, psychological safety, absolutely. And constructive discomfort, exactly. So it's not just everyone being nice all the time. So yeah, being able to be challenged. Yeah, and Rachel again saying a high degree of psychological safety, absolutely. Michael, cohesion and working to the same vision, definitely. Yeah, Brendan, clear communication. Engagement from team members at all levels of the business, from Connor, absolutely. Yeah, so people feeling engaged. People are aligned and committed. So Peter thinks that's absolutely, yeah. Yeah, supportive, Tony, you're not like on your own. Kira saying trust, absolutely. So teamwork, achievement, celebration, encouragement, supporting others to achieve the team's ambitions, absolutely, Francesca. Yeah, walk the talk, Declan. Yeah, it's not just this is what we say we are, these are our values up on the wall and we don't do anything about it. Yeah, so really walking the talk. Yeah, William, high level of teamwork, clearly communicated, achievable business goals, exactly. So those kind of goals that are stretching, but they are achievable as well. Valuing employees, shared care, absolutely. Employees given the right environment or tools to perform, which aligns with the business goals, exactly. And yeah, Connor, you probably would see a high level of staff retention, because people want to be there. If it's one of those places where you kind of go, okay, I'll do this for a year and then I'll get out again, is that sustainable? So yeah, absolutely. People wanting to be there, people staying. Yeah, shared values and purpose towards a high quality result, and at the same time meeting individual needs. Yeah, so it's that individual plus the group and the whole organization. Exactly. So really good to see all those different comments. I think those are all brilliant responses. And I note that, no one's saying, it's not that say, oh, everyone has this level of experience or everyone is outgoing and extroverted. It's that every individual might be very different and have different levels of experience or, areas of background or expertise, but they we're tapping into all of that and we're using those together, using those different approaches. So that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing those comments. Wanted to just share as I said, there's so much research that could be shared. But there was one about this bank in New Zealand, and they worked on their culture. And then 10 years later, they were still enjoying those sustained changes. When I say changes, some of the positive changes that they experienced were the percentage of employees who believed that this bank ANZ was living its values. It had been at 20% and it went up to 80%. And productivity in meetings went from 61% to 91%. And in terms of the bottom line, revenue per employee increased 89%. And it overtook its competitors in customer satisfaction and returns to shareholders. So there was all these, it wasn't just nice to have, it was really tangible results. And so, how did they do that, I suppose? Broken down into three areas. The first one is about establishing a common understanding. If I were to ask decision makers in your company, what are your top priority goals? There may be, lots of different answers and maybe different ways of measuring progress towards those goals. Because as I said, culture can be a bit intangible. So really important to gain clarity on the vision and the strategy. So aligning it, align and then execute. So move in the agreed direction. And then renew, look for ways to continuously improve. So that's what, Nicci identified last month. She was saying that, they worked with the team, the coaches, the sports psychologists. They worked on that to identify ways of defining their culture. But then, they met weekly with the sports psychologist. It wasn't something that got forgotten about. It was continually tracked. And they had the right tools to measure it as well, because if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get managed. And the second point there is to focus on a few changes that matter the most. Similar to how, if any of us took on 10 different New Year's resolutions, then probably now, mid-February, might not have achieved any of them. Whereas if you take on one, you might still be on track to achieving it now in mid-February. So the same thing goes, with focus on those just meaningful, maybe 5 aspects of an organization's culture. Work on those for 12 to 18 months. Start with the basics. And then after 18 months, if you've made sufficient progress, move on to the next element. So maybe it's starting off with, okay, let's create a baseline of openness and honesty. And in 18 months, if you can track that, you can see the progress has been made, then, okay, next, let's move on to trying to get a more innovative culture, for example. And step 3 then is about integrating cultural efforts with business improvement initiatives. So if cultural change is something that's kind of added on to someone's very long to-do list, it's probably not going to really get done. The changes aren't going to get made. With ANZ, the quality of coaching and customer focus at each branch was incorporated into the evaluations of branch managers, and it was tied to initiatives and rewards. So for a manager to succeed, they need to be displaying those behaviors that are in line with the culture. Okay, and I wanted to just pop this image up beside it because, again, it's clear that it's really just those small steps, gradual progress, and you will, continue to make that progress, as opposed to in this image here where the person on the right is, trying to get a really big goal and they can't get themselves off the ground really. So that's just one piece of research about sustaining cultural change. Another piece of research was about Google's Project Aristotle, which we mentioned last month. That one really came up and really seemed to resonate with what Nicci was saying. So just wanted to identify those 5 components that Google identified as being really key to high-performing teams. The first one came up in the chat a couple of times: psychological safety. That's being safe, feeling safe to be and express oneself. That if you make a mistake, that you're not going to be blamed or made to feel stupid. You're going to just learn from those mistakes. So feeling comfortable taking those interpersonal risks and speaking up. Second one was dependability. So in this, when there's dependability, the team members are reliable. They complete good quality work on time. They're not saying things like, well, that's not my job. Because if you're constantly saying that, your team members might be thinking, okay, I can't depend on them. The third one then is structure and clarity. So people need to be clear on what they're doing, and they need to know the consequences of their performance on the rest of the team and on the organization. So there should be those clear goals set at individual level and or at group level. And as we mentioned as well, the goals should be challenging and attainable. That came up in the chat too. Having a sense of meaning. The meaning of work is personal, and that can vary from person to person. It might be financial security. It might be that your work helps you support your family, or that it helps the team succeed, or that it helps the community, or whatever it might be. But just having some sense of purpose in either the work that you're doing or the output of it. And the fifth one was about having impact. So what are the results of one's work, and being able to see that your work is contributing to the organization's goals. Okay, so just that judgment that I am actually making a difference. So as I said, that was done by Google. They conducted hundreds of interviews and surveys, and they actually found some variables that I found it a little bit surprising, things that weren't connected with team performance. And that was things like workload size, tenure, the extroversion of team members, the co-location of teammates, so i.e. team members sitting in the same office together or not. Now, those may impact team performance in other teams, but they didn't in Google. So I found that quite interesting. So as I said, this is just some of it, like a little taster of some of the research that is out there. Just out of curiosity, I want to put up a poll. If you were to think of your own team or your own organization, which of those 5 areas do you think that you would like to develop the most? So if you could wave a magic wand over one of those areas, would it be the psychological safety you'd like to improve? Do you think people could be more dependable? Do you think it's about the structure and the clarity of having those clear goals? Would it be meaning? Would you like your work to be more meaningful? Or impact, seeing that your work is making a difference to the organization? So I'm just seeing plenty of people coming in with responses there. Just thinking, yeah, of which one, and this is an anonymous poll, by the way, so no one will know how you voted, but I'll just give you another minute. I can see good proportion of people have voted. The one that's coming out at the moment, structure and clarity, about 50% of people are saying that that one is most relevant for their team. And so if I just share the results of that up now, you can see 14% said psychological safety they'd like to work on, 26% said dependability, 51%. So that piece on structure and clarity is coming out as the one that people would really like to focus on and get clear on. 3% said meaning and 6% said impact. So interesting to see just what, different teams have their own different unique challenges. So I'll take that down, stop sharing. Okay. Okay, let me just see now. So what I'm going to do, okay, so as we said there, we have those different areas. What I'd like to do is start introducing some frameworks that you can each take away, and that you can use with your team or your organization. So let me just stop sharing for 1 second, and I'm just going to pull this up. Okay. So the first one that we have here Okay. So this is a document that I call the Ways of Working document. And this first one, it can be really valuable for any team, but especially I think for, remote teams or any teams that might have new members. This can be a really great way to kind of get to know people a little bit. So this might be, say, if you've ever thought, oh, I wish I knew, what does my manager want? Would they prefer, a lot of detail, or would they just prefer a really high level overview? Or maybe you've been receiving emails from colleagues late at night and you're wondering, do they expect me to reply to that? Why are they communicating in that way? This tool is really useful for that. So again, it can be if you're working in person, remote, or hybrid teams. I'm just popping up this QR code. So if you put your phone up to that screen, you can scan that and get access to these frameworks. Alternatively, Veronica will put the link in the chat, which will have just basically a link to that, and you can open it and download it that way. It's just a shared file, a shared folder that has those frameworks, it has the slides, it has a bit of research on Project Aristotle. So with this one, you can see there, you can really clearly identify, for example, my days and my working days and hours are, as follows. So I work Tuesday to Friday. So if you send me an email on Friday afternoon, it's probably going to be Tuesday by the time I get to it. So just bear that in mind, that kind of thing. Or, I prefer to, once my kids are gone to bed, I prefer to work in the evenings. So that's why I send off emails at 10 o'clock at night, but I don't expect a reply at that time. So clarifying that. Communication, when and how do you prefer to communicate? Are you saying, look, if, I've got hundreds of emails a day, if it's urgent, make sure to give me a call, just clarifying these kinds of things. Management, you can say, how do you like to manage others, or how do you like to be managed? Again, depending on your role. So you might say, look, I really, I want my manager to really push me and challenge me. So don't be afraid to give me that feedback. You can share that with people. You can see there as well, personality, like our personalities do shape how we prefer to work. You might say, look, I'm, quite introverted, so I do appreciate quiet time when I need to focus, but that doesn't mean that I don't like socializing outside of work or, at break times. Or again, I'm very big picture, creative thinking. So I love that kind of work. I have to work a bit harder when it comes to the finer details of things. So you can share aspects of your personality, your preferences, interests. That could be in work or outside of work. You might say, oh, I'm currently doing a coaching diploma in the evenings, and someone else might see that and say, oh, okay, brilliant. Like I did that, if you want to chat about it, or, oh, that sounds really interesting, so it can be useful in that way. And other, just space for anything else you'd like to share that you'd like people to know about working with you. So that could be your goals, your interests. You can share goals that you're working on. So for example, oh, I'm trying to, be a better listener. So call me out if I ever interrupt, I really want to develop that. So this is just one way of doing this. Now, something to note, potential caveat, I suppose, is this one, if you think that there might not be a great amount of psychological safety at the moment, then, a way to create psychological safety is not simply demanding more information from people. So if you're in an environment where you don't believe there's a whole lot of psychological safety, maybe there's a blame culture, or you've seen people using employees' information against them, you may want to start by doing a bit more groundwork on building psychological safety and kind of set the scene before you start asking for these kinds of details from people. So if you're curious about that and you'd like to chat about it, I'd be happy to have a chat and say if we think this might work. But yeah, it is just, that process of gradually building up culture. So that's the ways of working. The second one then is a team canvas. And it's really useful for setting norms and standards so that every team member is clear of what's expected of them. And this could be done by printing it out and completing it in person, maybe using sticky notes, or it could be used, say like collaborative tools like Mural. Again, I'll pop the QR code up there. So I would recommend, if you're going through this, gather the team together and have each person think about, think individually about how they would answer each of these headings, and then come together to consolidate and prioritize. Okay, so you can see all the different, clarifying the people, the goals, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what do we value, what kind of rules and activities do we have, what kind of expectations are there, and then at the very heart of it is the purpose. So that is one way of, again, that can be done if you have, new members of a team. Like say, for example, if you said, oh, well, we worked on our culture 2 years ago, brilliant, but so much has happened in 2 years. It's not a huge amount of time, but so much has changed. So these are things that you can use to just refresh and update, the process of kind of defining or redefining culture. And then we have this other one about the culture design canvas. And again, I'll just pop the same QR code there. So you have that, you can scan it, or you can click the link that Veronica put in the chat. So this one, again, it captures the ways of going about decision making, how you want to have meetings, how you deliver feedback, what kind of norms and rules you abide by. There's a space of how we can create or promote psychological safety. So you can always come back to this and say, well, remember, we agreed on this, and you can come back to it. And, often, like, you might say, oh, well, we know the norms and rules, and we know that psychological safety is important. Yeah, they can often happen kind of automatically, or maybe it's sort of in people's minds that, yeah, we all know that. But again, the things that are happening automatically, it's less likely that they are going to be as effective as if you design them intentionally. So going with the flow is less likely to create a really high performing culture. Okay. So as I said, those are available for you to download and use. What I'd like to do is invite you to go into breakout rooms and just have a bit of a discussion on those frameworks. So thinking that if you were going to use these templates in your work, what do you think might be the benefits? Where do you see that it could be helpful? What kinds of challenges might you encounter? So anything you think might not work or might be an obstacle. And what might you need to consider if you're going to use these? What kind of things would you need to think of in advance? So for example, if you're saying, right, we're going to do a team workshop, do you need to hire an external facilitator, or could it just be someone from outside of your team? Are you going to do it in person or remote? Is it, what other things might you need to consider? What's the format? What's the, how are people going to do this? So what kind of things might you need to consider if you were going to use it? So I suppose the point of this is just to really learn from each other and discuss so that you feel in a better position to use them if you do want to use them. So you can have that discussion, and then you can come back to the main room and we'll have a bit of discussion again about, what kinds of things came up, and I can answer any questions that you may have. So I'm just going to pause the recording because, as I said, these breakouts won't be recorded. So the main things that came through there from the breakout rooms was people were saying that this could be a really useful set of frameworks. They just hope that people would feel comfortable being open and honest and sharing their thoughts and feelings. And some people were saying that in their team that might not happen. Some might be a bit hesitant to share how they really feel or how they think. So I would say that when working on these, the first thing is to set the expectations and make it clear, so that it's not just, oh, come along to this workshop and people don't know what to expect. We don't want people coming along and thinking they can just sit back and listen. We don't want them to be passive. We want them to be active participants. So setting the expectation, saying that it's really important that every single voice is heard. And the facilitator then should be making sure that every voice is heard. So going around the room and, even if someone is a bit more quiet or a bit more hesitant, trying to get them to contribute to the conversation. Another useful way of doing it is the think, pair, share tactic. So getting someone to think individually, so maybe jotting down their ideas on a post-it note, and you're saying, there's no right or wrong answers. We just want input from every single person. So jot down your answers as an individual, and then pair. So maybe just work with one other person. So if you're in person, you might turn to the person beside you. If you're online, it might be creating a breakout room for people to go off and discuss. And they're just sharing their ideas that they had when they thought individually. And then share. So we did think individually, share with maybe one or two other people, and then, pair with one other person, and then share to the rest of the group. So getting everyone then to share their ideas, and you can then consolidate and prioritize the different inputs that came up. So that's one way to or a couple of ways to just make sure that everyone is their voice is heard and everyone is contributing. It's also really important to ensure that there is leadership involvement and engagement. So it's really important that the leader or the manager of the group is seen to be involved with this, that they're not leaving it to someone else. But similarly, important that the leader or the manager isn't dominating the conversation. Okay, so they should be engaged and involved, but not dictating or directing the way that they go. Another comment that came up was about making these changes sustainable. And that is something that comes up time and time again, is that, we did this and then it got forgotten. That happens, that's so common with change. Some of the ways that you can try to tackle it, again, building in time to sustain it, and, building in ways that you can say, okay, this is how we're going to spot if standards are slipping, and this is how we're going to address them. So I mentioned that in Nicci's event last month in January, she was saying that they learned ways of being able to be assertive and calling each other out while also still being respectful. It's not about putting someone down, but it is about calling someone out and saying, respectfully, that they're not adhering to the standards that we all agreed upon. And again, that aspect of everyone agreed upon this, it's not being forced upon you, you came up with this idea, will help people to be less resistant to it. We were also saying that it's really important to link it to the KPIs. So if a leader wants to be performing effectively, they need to be living those values and sustaining that culture. So it's part of their performance. So that's another way to make it, it's not something that's nice to have, it's on the side, it's when we have time for it. No, it's every day, and it's built into your performance indicators. I asked then, what are people taking from today? What kind of small steps are they going to implement? And, people were saying this is going to be a great tool to begin an open conversation. One person was saying that they had new employees starting, so this is going to be great to, hit the ground running. It's setting it off with them all creating that shared understanding. Another person was mentioning that they'd start with the leadership team, which I do agree, it's a great place to start, because that the kind of changes can trickle down. Another person was saying that they would try to work on, the communication structure and clarifying the really common goals. That probably came from the Project Aristotle from Google. That was something that the majority of people in the session said that they want to work on structure and clarity. And another person said that this is going to be really, really useful for their diversity and inclusion strategy. So that's great to see as well. And then speaking of diversity and inclusion, on the 16th of March is when we'll have our next session. And that is going to be hosted by Bridget Farrell from All Talk Training. It's called Exploring the Challenges and Opportunities of Leading a Multicultural Team. So we'll be discussing multiculturalism and inclusion in the workplace, identifying, the benefits of having a multicultural or a diverse team, and how to, manage any potential challenges and reap the benefits of a multicultural team. So creating that inclusive environment, trying to avoid miscommunication, trying to ensure people are engaged and motivated. So I'm really looking forward to that session next month. But that is all from me for this session of Never Mind the Buzzwords, and I hope to see you on future sessions.